In 2013, a cup of coffee in Caracas cost 2 bolivars. By 2023, it cost 2 million. This is the story of how a currency died. But this isn't just a story about Venezuela. In early 2026, Nicolas Maduro was captured by the United States. The world celebrated. The headlines declared victory. But here's the question no one is asking. Will removing the man fix the money? To understand why the answer is no, you first have to understand how Venezuela got here. In the 1970s and 1980s, Venezuela was one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America. It was called the Saudi Arabia of the Western Hemisphere. Oil made up 95% of its export revenue. The country had the largest proven oil reserves in the world, surpassing even Saudi Arabia. When oil prices were high, the government had money to spend on ambitious social programs, infrastructure projects, and generous subsidies. When prices were low, the government borrowed, confident that the next oil boom was just around the corner. But the system was never designed to survive without oil. This is what economists call the resource curse. A country becomes so dependent on a single commodity that it never builds anything else. No manufacturing sector, no agricultural diversification, no technology industry, just oil. And when the oil runs out, or when the price collapses, the entire economy collapses with it. The first warning signs appeared in the early 2000s. The government introduced currency controls, claiming they were necessary to protect the bolivar from speculation and capital flight. In reality, they were the first step toward losing control. When a government tells you that you can't freely exchange your money, it's not protecting the currency. It's admitting that the currency is already weak. By 2013, Venezuela had a dual exchange rate system. There was an official rate, set by the government at an artificially strong level, and a black market rate, set by reality, and reflecting the true value of the bolivar. The gap between the two was enormous, sometimes as much as 10-to-1. If you wanted dollars at the official rate, you had to wait months, fill out endless paperwork, and hope you were politically connected. If you needed dollars immediately, you went to the black market and paid 10 times more. This created a massive incentive for corruption. Those with access to official dollars could buy them cheap and sell them on the black market for a fortune. Government officials, business elites, and anyone with the right connections became wealthy overnight. The system was designed to fail. Then, in 2014, everything changed. The price of oil, which had been hovering around $100 per barrel for years, collapsed to $30. Venezuela's government lost its primary source of revenue overnight. The country's oil production, already declining due to years of underinvestment and mismanagement, couldn't compensate. But the spending didn't stop. The government had promised pensions, subsidies, food programs, and public sector jobs to millions of people. To keep those promises without oil revenue, it had only one option: print money. And that's exactly what it did. The central bank began printing bolivars at an unprecedented rate. At first, the inflation was manageable, a few percentage points per month. Then it accelerated. By 2016, inflation was running at 50% per month. By 2018, it had reached 50% per day. This is hyperinflation, and once it starts, it's almost impossible to stop without destroying the currency entirely. Let's put this in perspective with concrete numbers. In 2013, $1 was worth 6 bolivars at the official rate. By 2016, it was worth 100 on the black market. By 2018, it was worth 1 million. In 2021, the government cut 6 zeros off the currency, the third time it had done so in less than a decade. Even after that adjustment, by 2023, $1 was worth 36 million bolivars when adjusted for all the zeros that had been removed. The currency had become worthless. People stopped counting money, they started weighing it. A loaf of bread required a stack of bills so large that it was easier to carry it in a bag than in a wallet. Salaries became meaningless. A teacher's monthly wage, paid at the beginning of the month, could be spent in a single day or even a single hour, as prices updated constantly throughout the day. Businesses stopped printing price tags. They used chalkboards instead, erasing and updating prices multiple times per day. This pattern is not new. It has happened before and it will happen again. In 1923, the Weimar Republic in Germany experienced hyperinflation so severe that people used banknotes as wallpaper because it was cheaper than buying actual wallpaper. A loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in January 1923 cost 200 billion marks by November. In 2008, Zimbabwe printed a $100 trillion note, which couldn't even buy a loaf of bread. The government eventually abandoned the Zimbabwean dollar entirely and adopted the US dollar and South African rand. The pattern is always the same. A government loses its revenue, often due to war, economic collapse, or commodity price shocks. It prints money to cover the gap. Inflation accelerates as more money chases the same amount of goods. The public loses trust and flees to foreign currencies or hard assets, and eventually the currency dies. The only difference is the speed. In Venezuela, it took 10 years. In Weimar, it took 2. In Zimbabwe, it took 5. But the outcome is always the same. By 2019, the Venezuelan government had lost control. The bolivar was no longer functioning as money. People refused to accept it for anything of value. Shops began pricing goods in dollars. Restaurants printed menus in dollars. Even street vendors demanded dollars or refused to sell their goods for bolivars. The government, facing reality, quietly allowed this to happen. It didn't officially abandon the bolivar, but it stopped enforcing the currency controls that had been in place for over a decade. This is what economists call de facto dollarization. The people chose a new currency, and the government had no choice but to accept it. By 2024, an estimated 70% of all transactions in Venezuela were conducted in US dollars. The bolivar still existed on paper, and government salaries were still technically paid in bolivares, but in practice it was dead. It had become a unit of account with no real purchasing power. Now, let's return to the question that opened this story. In January 2026, Nicolás Maduro was captured by US forces in a coordinated operation. The operation was swift. The headlines were triumphant. International leaders praised the move as a victory for democracy and human rights. But here's what didn't change: the currency. Maduro did not create this crisis alone. He inherited a broken system and accelerated its collapse through mismanagement, corruption, and authoritarian control. But the damage was done long before he took power. The debt remained, the trust was gone, and the currency was already dead. Removing the man doesn't remove the debt, it doesn't restore the trust, and it doesn't bring back the currency. So will Venezuela's inflation stop now that Maduro is gone? The answer is probably not, at least not immediately. Here's why. First, the debt remains. Venezuela owes billions of dollars in external debt to countries like China and Russia, and internal debt to its own citizens in the form of unpaid pensions and salaries. That debt doesn't disappear with a change in leadership. Second, the trust has been destroyed. No one in Venezuela trusts the bolivar anymore. Even if a new government tried to reintroduce it with promises of sound monetary policy and central bank independence, the population would reject it. They've been burned too many times. The memory of hyperinflation is too fresh. Third, the dollarization is irreversible. The people have already chosen the dollar. Trying to force them back to the bolivar would be political suicide and economically disastrous. And fourth, the economic structure is broken. There is no production. There is no investment. There are no functioning institutions. The oil industry, once the backbone of the economy, is operating at a fraction of its capacity. These things take years, sometimes decades, to rebuild. The currency didn't collapse because of one man. It collapsed because of a system. A system built on oil dependency, currency controls, and money printing. And systems don't reset with a single arrest. The best-case scenario for Venezuela is this. The new government maintains dollarization, attracts foreign investment by offering political stability and property rights, and slowly rebuilds the economy. Growth will be slow. Inequality will be high, as those with access to dollars thrive while those without struggle. But at least there will be stability. The bolivar, however, will never return. It will become a museum piece, a reminder of what happens when trust is lost. The worst-case scenario is this. The new government, eager to assert national sovereignty and reject the dollar as a symbol of American imperialism, tries to reintroduce a national currency, perhaps a digital currency backed by oil reserves or gold. The population, traumatized by the past, rejects it. The instability continues, and the cycle repeats. This is the lesson Venezuela teaches us. When trust in money breaks, it doesn't matter who's in charge. The damage is done. The reset is inevitable. Maduro's capture might change the politics. It might bring new leadership, new policies, and new hope. But it won't change the economics. Not immediately, not easily. This channel isn't about politics. It's about systems. And the Venezuelan system broke long before Maduro. And it will take decades to rebuild, regardless of who's in power. If you think removing a dictator solves a monetary crisis, this channel isn't for you. If you want to understand why systems collapse and how they're rebuilt, stay here. Subscribe. Let's look at what happens next. Venezuela in 2026 is not starting from zero. It's starting from negative. The infrastructure is crumbling. Hospitals lack basic supplies. Schools are empty because teachers can't afford to work for worthless salaries. The electrical grid fails regularly, plunging entire cities into darkness for days. The water system is contaminated, and millions of Venezuelans have already left the country, creating one of the largest refugee crises in the Western Hemisphere. Over 7 million people, nearly a quarter of the population, have fled to Colombia, Peru, Chile, and beyond. These are not just numbers. These are doctors, engineers, teachers, and entrepreneurs. The human capital that any economy needs to rebuild has already left. Rebuilding trust in a national currency would require more than just good intentions. It would require years of consistent, disciplined monetary policy. It would require a central bank that is truly independent from political pressure. It would require a government that doesn't print money to finance spending. And it would require a population that believes, after a decade of betrayal, that this time will be different. That's a tall order. History shows that once hyperinflation destroys a currency, the population's trust doesn't return easily. In Germany after Weimar, it took the introduction of an entirely new currency, the Rentenmark, backed by real assets to restore confidence. In Zimbabwe, the government simply gave up and adopted foreign currencies. Venezuela is following Zimbabwe's path, whether it admits it or not. There's another factor at play here: geopolitics. Venezuela's oil reserves are still there, buried beneath the ground, and whoever controls Venezuela controls access to those reserves. The United States, China, and Russia all have strategic interests in the country. Maduro's capture removes one player from the board, but it doesn't change the game. A new government will still have to navigate these competing interests. It will still have to decide who gets access to the oil and on what terms. And those decisions will shape the country's economic future far more than any monetary policy ever could. Consider this. Even if Venezuela's new government manages to stabilize the economy, attract investment, and rebuild institutions, the scars of hyperinflation will remain for generations. People who lived through this crisis will never forget. They will teach their children to distrust government promises. They will hoard dollars, gold, and any other store of value they can find. They will be skeptical of banks, wary of inflation, and quick to flee at the first sign of trouble. This is the psychological legacy of hyperinflation, and it lasts far longer than the economic damage. So what does this mean for the rest of the world? Venezuela is not an isolated case. It's a warning. A warning about what happens when governments lose fiscal discipline, when they print money to solve political problems, when they ignore the laws of economics in favor of short-term popularity. The same pattern that destroyed the Bolivar is playing out in slower motion in other parts of the world. Governments everywhere are running massive deficits, central banks are printing money at unprecedented rates, and trust in fiat currencies is eroding, slowly but surely. Venezuela is just the most extreme example, but the lesson applies universally. When trust in money breaks, the consequences are catastrophic, and no amount of political change can undo the damage overnight. The story of Venezuela is not over. It's entering a new chapter. But that chapter won't be written by Maduro's capture. It will be written by the choices the new government makes, by the trust the population is willing to give, and by the patience of a traumatized nation. The currency is gone, the economy is broken, and the road to recovery is long. But one thing is certain: the lessons of Venezuela will echo for decades. They will be studied in economics classrooms, they will be cited in policy debates, and they will serve as a stark reminder of what happens when the foundation of an economy, the currency itself, collapses. This is what happens when money breaks, and it's a lesson the world cannot afford to ignore.